Tsavo Reserve, late morning. A young bull elephant lay slumped near the edge of a dry salt trail, his body curved awkwardly against the soil. The front right leg was twisted beneath him at an unnatural angle, swollen to twice its size. A thin loop of wire, almost invisible against the dust, bit deep into the flesh just above the joint. The wire had been buried beneath a shallow crust of dirt, hidden where elephants often stepped. Blood had dried into the cracked ground around him. He did not call out. He did not shift. Only the occasional twitch of his ears marked time. Caleb had been walking a fence line to check for breaches when he spotted the still form below a rise. From a distance, it could have been a termite mound or a fallen log. It wasn't until he lifted his binoculars and saw the breath, shallow and slow, that began to run. His boots slid through the soft earth as he approached. The elephant's eyes were open but unfocused. His side rose once, then paused, then rose again, weak and slow. The leg was hot and trembling. Flies clung to the torn skin around the snare. Caleb knelt beside him, keeping his voice low, more vibration than words. "You're not alone," he murmured. He did not touch him. Not yet. He pulled the radio from his belt and called it in. Coordinates, audition, urgency. He kept his tone flat, but his fingers gripped the receiver tightly. A poacher's snare could kill slowly or fast. Infection, thirst, collapse, they're all circling now. The elephant did not resist. He did not move at all. That stillness, Caleb knew, was a worse sign than thrashing. Nearby, the wind moved dry leaves through the brush, but the air around the elephant was motionless. His body had stopped fighting. The leg was not just wounded, it was dying. Above the joint, the muscle had begun to waste. Every few minutes, a low moan slipped from his chest. No toot, but shaped like breath that didn't want to leave. Caleb laid a folded canvas tarp near the elephant's flank to shade part of his body. He slid a water container into reach, but the elephant made no move to drink. The tongue inside his mouth was dry and pale. Over the radio, another ranger confirmed they were en route with sedation gear and a truck. 20 minutes, if the elephant could make it that long. If the leg didn't collapse further. If the infection hadn't reached the bloodstream. Caleb crouched beside him and watched for signs. Shivering, breath skips, and dullness. The signs were all there. If they tried to move him too early, he might not survive the lift. But if they waited too long, the leg might rupture from within. If he stood now, he could fall and never rise again. If he stayed down, he might bleed inward until the breath simply stopped. A small bird landed nearby and began pecking at the dry soil, unaware of the shape beside it. The elephant didn't flinch. Caleb adjusted the tarp slightly, just enough to block the worst of the sun from the elephant's shoulder. "Almost there," he said softly, not expecting a response. The elephant's ears flicked once, then again. In the distance, the soft growl of a diesel engine rose from beyond the acacia line. Dust followed it like a ribbon. Caleb stood and raised a hand. Help was coming, but they still didn't know if it was in time. The wind picked up briefly, stirring the dry salt line and brushing grit over the elephant's side. He didn't move. His eyes stayed half open, watching nothing. The wire held firm. The leg trembled once more. Then, still. The engine settled into silence as the rescue vehicle rolled to a stop on the slope. Dust clung to the air between the trees. Caleb rose slowly and walked to meet them, keeping his voice low as he briefed the others. They approached without haste, carrying sedation gear, stretch tarps, and a water pack wrapped in canvas. Every movement was careful. The elephant had not changed position. His eyes remained open but dull, and his breathing was shallower now, each rise of the chest barely clearing the dust. Two of the team knelt beside the injured leg, scanning the snare. The wire had burrowed deep, nearly hidden beneath swelling and dried blood. Pus wept from one side. The skin above the joint had darkened to a thick, unhealthy gray. The snare had likely been on for days. The elephant had dragged himself for at least 100 meters before collapsing here. They knew because the marks in the dirt were still fresh, long weeps where his side had pushed through the earth, ending at this exact resting place. Caleb stood at the elephant's head, watching for signs of stress. A flare of the nostrils, a flick of the ears, but the animal gave neither. His trunk lay still, curled toward his chest like a drying leaf. Every few minutes his back leg would twitch once, then fall still again. The team had only a small window. If they sedated him and he panicked, he could rupture the muscle completely. If they didn't move him, the wound could spread deeper, reaching the bone or bloodstream. If infection had already reached that point, no field treatment would be enough. A short line was inserted beneath the hide near the shoulder blade. The sedative would not knock him out completely, just take the edge from his panic if he stirred. One ranger whispered a count as the dose entered. Caleb didn't move from the head. He had seen elephants die with their eyes open before. The quiet happened slowly. Not a collapse, but a loosening, as if something inside them let go, piece by piece. "It's not enough," one of the rangers said under his breath. "He's not strong enough for transport." Caleb didn't answer. Another ranger knelt near the flank and pressed his hand gently to the rib cage. "Heartbeat's slowing," he said. The wire was still on. They had to cut it now, even if it meant risk. The decision came fast. A curved blade was brought forward, and two of the team steadied the swollen limb while the ranger worked. The blade moved in slow, short strokes, slicing through hide caked with mud and dried tissue. The elephant exhaled sharply, angle rush of air from deep inside the lungs. The sound was low and strange, like pressure being released from beneath the earth. Caleb placed a hand on the ground beside the trunk. "You're still with us," he said softly. A small line of blood began to run as the wire loosened, bright against the older wounds. The leg jerked once, then went still again. The wire dropped free. There was no triumph, just silence. The rangers looked to one another. The next decision was harder. If they lifted him now and the strain pulled the muscle, he could lose the entire limb. If they waited, the swelling could cut off blood entirely. Every minute forward came with risk. Every still moment came with a cost. 2. The sedative would wear off within the hour. Caleb crouched low again, eyes on the elephant's face. There was a tremor near the eye. Not a blink, not a shift. Just a small tremor. It was enough. They prepared the tarp and angled the lifting straps. He was still breathing. That was all they had. That was all they needed. In the silence that followed, the dust began to rise again. A faint breeze moved the edge of the tarp where it touched the soil. The elephant's chest rose, then paused, then rose again. Barely, but it rose. The lifting tarp was thick with dust and stitched reinforcement, wide enough to cradle the weight of a grown bull, but barely long enough for this one. The rescue truck had backed in slowly from the western path, and the team worked in near silence, laying ropes, cushioning the wooden planks, and placing the straps in precise loops around the elephant's chest and hips. The leg was still swollen and leaking from where the wire had been. They kept a clean wrap over the worst of it, but they all knew the deeper damage was inside. If the limb failed during the hoist, the shock could stop his heart. If he buckled on the journey, he could crush a lung or dislocate the spine. The stakes were unchanged. If he moved too suddenly, he could die. If he stayed too long, the leg might take the rest of him. 2 men stood at the front, one hand each on the elephant's shoulder. The sedative had softened his tension but not removed it. He could feel the pressure of the straps under his body. The friction as the canvas pressed into his hide. His eye moved, slow and dark. His ears did not twitch. The trunk was slack now, laid across the dirt like a rope. It had not curled or lifted in over 20 minutes. Caleb signaled for the winch to begin. A low groan of tension filled the air as the lines tightened. The tarp began to shift, pulling the weight of nearly 3 tons from the earth. The first inch was the hardest. The tarp slid unevenly, the right hip lifting first, then stalling. The elephant did not vocalize, but his chest heaved with effort. The leg twisted under the strap. They adjusted quickly, adding padding beneath the rise. Then the second pull came, and the body lifted clearer from the soil. The wound dripped slowly. The breath stayed steady. If he panicked, it would be over. If he thrashed, the truck wouldn't hold. Halfway through the hoist, the weight swayed slightly. One of the rear straps caught against a side plank and snapped tight. A ranger shouted, "Hold!" and the whole system froze. Dust clouded the air. The elephant's flank trembled once. The front leg kicked weakly, then settled. Caleb stepped forward and pressed his hand gently to the trunk. "Easy," he whispered. "You're almost there." They adjusted again, slower this time. The straps realigned, and the lift continued. At last, the bulk of him hovered just inches above the bed. The flat platform had been reinforced with thick beams and lined with old grain sacks and straw to keep friction low. The team guided him down inch by inch, easing him into position with steady arms and wordless gestures. When his full weight rested on the planks, the suspension groaned and then held. No one celebrated. The journey was only beginning. Caleb climbed into the back and crouched near the shoulder where he could watch the breath. A ranger passed him the water canvas, and he trickled a few drops into the elephant's mouth. There was no response, but the trunk flinched slightly as the water touched the tongue. It was enough to keep going. The truck began to move, crawling south across the reserve. Every bump was a hazard. Every shift of the frame required balance. The elephant's leg was packed in cold wraps, but circulation was still uncertain. They had 3 hours of daylight and maybe 5 hours before the sedation wore thin. If he woke before arrival, the straps might not hold. If the infection moved faster than the medicine, the lungs could swell, and he could go quiet without warning. Caleb kept his eyes on the elephant's ribs. Each breath came slower now, but they came. The light filtered through the trees in long yellow streaks. Dust followed the wheels like mist. In the quiet, the only sound was the soft creak of the ropes and the breathing of a creature carried not by force, but by the smallest thread of survival. And still, the truck moved forward. At the edge of the sanctuary compound, beneath a canopy of dull canvas and rustling shade trees, the elephant lay in silence. They had lowered him onto thick layers of straw, piled high to ease pressure from the injured leg. The truck's journey had ended without collapse, but that had been 3 days ago. Since then he had not stood, not once, his body pressed into the bedding with a weight that seemed fused to the ground. Every few hours, a vet cleaned the wound with saline and a soft cloth, the gash now open and raw where the snare had cut deepest. Antibiotics were given through a line just behind his ear. Fluids by tube, nothing by will. He had not lifted his head. His mouth remained closed except for the moments when someone gently pulled the lips apart to trickle water in. His trunk lay stiff beside him, the curve fixed in place. The leg was no longer bleeding, but the swelling had spread along the belly and warmth pulsed around the joint. His skin, once thick and ash-colored, had turned dry in patches. Flies still hovered, brushing the corners of his eyes. He did not blink them away. Caleb came every morning and sat near the edge of the pen, his arms resting on his knees, watching the rhythm of breath. There was nothing urgent to do. Just be there. The team rotated through the shifts. They spoke in low voices, kept the shade in place, and monitored every small signal. But each day that passed without movement added weight to the silence. If he couldn't stand, he wouldn't live. Pressure wounds, lung collapse, and organ strain, those things came quickly. If he stood too early, the limb could rupture from inside. If he didn't rise at all, there was no more time to give. On the second evening, the vet had felt a tremor in the injured foot. It came and went. The team noted it, hoped, But by morning, it was gone again. He hadn't eaten more than a few blades of grass since arrival. The food was placed near his mouth: wet mash, soaked roots, soft leaves from familiar trees. But he left it untouched. His eyes stayed open sometimes, tracking shapes with a slowness that didn't seem tied to alertness, just quiet resignation. As if his body was still there, but the part that reached forward was not. The third morning broke colder than the rest. The sky was pale and clear. Dew gathered on the straw near his flank. Caleb arrived just past first light, and for a few minutes he stood at the gate watching. Then something shifted. The elephant's back leg pushed against the straw, slow and uncertain. His trunk twitched, dragging slightly toward the edge of the mat. One ear folded inward, then reset. Caleb stepped closer, crouched low, still. Then the front leg moved. Not fully, not a lift. Just a draw inward, a muscle stretching against itself. The motion was halting and stiff, but it was there. The vet called for the others. The elephant curled his back again, a ripple passing through his spine. He grunted, low, hoarse, barely audible, then pushed. It took 2 more tries. On the third, he got the back legs beneath him. The front leg trembled, nearly buckled, but he paused, bracing the injured limb in the straw. Slowly, inch by inch, his chest lifted, then his shoulders. He stood, not tall, not steady, but upright. No one moved, no one cheered. The breath that left the humans around him was quiet and deep. He swayed gently, testing the balance. Blood moved again through the leg. If he stood too long, it might strain. But if he lay back down, the strength might not return. This moment was narrow and fragile. But it was life. Outside the pen, the wind moved across the trees, rustling the dry leaves and letting sunlight reach through the canvas. The elephant's ears lifted once, catching the air. And for the first time, the dust beneath him shifted with the weight of his own choice. The swelling had gone down. Not entirely, but enough that the vet no longer packed the leg with ice every morning. The elephant had begun shifting his weight, standing longer each day, pressing his trunk into the nearby acacia pile to steady himself. He'd taken 2 short walks inside the enclosure, wobbly, wide-stepped, but deliberate. Caleb followed at a distance, letting him move at his own rhythm. The limp was heavy, but the shoulder was gaining strength. Recovery was slow, as expected, but steady. Then, during an aerial pass over the southern trails for unrelated surveillance, one of the field drones captured a short burst of strange movement. A small elephant near the salt line, circling a patch of brush at dusk. The location was less than 5 kilometers from the original snare site. The drone hovered, gathering more footage. What stood out wasn't just the size, it was the pattern. The animal looped back again and again, pausing to raise its trunk, letting out short, rhythmic calls that barely carried past the brush. Alone. No herd, no migration route nearby. Caleb reviewed the footage that evening with the reserve coordinator. The calf looked no older than 4 years, skin loose around the shoulders, ears slightly frayed at the edges. It was too young to be wandering alone unless displaced, and too vocal to be at ease. There had been no confirmed family sightings near that quadrant in weeks, and the behavior, repetitive circles, periodic stops to scent the ground, suggested an anchor point, a place where something or someone had been left behind. They launched a quiet ground search the next morning, starting from the coordinates and moving in widening arcs. The land was dry and brittle from a week without rain. Prints were hard to read. The calf had moved north sometime in the night but remained close to the line where the original snare had been found. No blood, no signs of active injury, but she returned each dusk, pacing the same narrow band between 2 trees and sleeping near a worn patch of dirt. The team observed from a distance. Her posture was uneven. The right leg favored the left. She was not starving, but her rib line was visible, and her belly looked slightly drawn. By the second night, the team made a decision. If she remained isolated, her chance of survival dropped quickly. A young elephant without guidance could wander into roads, settle near human settlements, or fall prey to larger predators. They coordinated a plan to guide her, slowly and without stress, toward a holding field at the reserve's edge. No dart, no sedation, just time, space, and quiet presence. The process would take days. Caleb was present the evening she finally stepped through the low funnel gate. Her walk was hesitant, eyes darting between the humans on the perimeter. But she didn't flee. Her head lowered slightly as she crossed the field and reached the central straw pile where clean water had been placed. She didn't drink right away. She stood still, listening. Back at the sanctuary, the bull was still recovering. But something in him had shifted in the last day. He had risen more easily and moved with less hesitation. When the calf was mentioned aloud that morning, Caleb had spoken quietly beside him. "She might know you," he said. The elephant's ears moved once, then stillness. What was at risk hadn't changed. The leg could still relapse, infection might return, and introducing another elephant carried its own uncertainty. But something rare had surfaced between 2 points on the map, something beyond wounds and shelter. And in the evening light just outside the holding pen, the calf lifted her trunk once more and called. The sound moved across the reserve like breath over dust, soft, shaped by memory, and unanswered. For now. The gate creaked open just after sunrise. Light moved in narrow strips across the holding paddock, brushing against the edge of the straw and catching the outline of the smaller elephant. She stepped through with slow, measured steps, guided by the scent of water and the calm body language of the rangers around her. Her ears twitched frequently, not in panic, but in alertness, scanning every rustle, every shadow. The walk from the outer edge of the reserve had taken nearly 3 days, paced by patience and silence. She had not fought, she had not run, but neither had she rested fully. Her steps had always pointed forward, toward something she could not name but seemed to know. The sanctuary team stayed back, giving her space. She paused near the center of the compound, trunk lifted toward the fence line. The air smelled different here, saltier, thicker with hay, and laced with old antiseptic. She turned in a slow half-circle, lowering her trunk to the soil, testing it. Then she walked toward the shaded area at the far end, where the larger enclosure began. The bull had been standing since early light. He was not pacing, not feeding, just standing. His front leg was still bandaged, but the swelling had eased enough to allow more weight. For days, his energy had risen in small increments, steps forward, longer rests on his feet, soft rumbles late at night when no one was near. But he had not vocalized in anyone's presence. Not until now. The calf crossed the halfway point of the enclosure. Her steps slowed, and her body leaned slightly left as if unsure whether to continue. Her trunk flicked once, then lowered, and then the bull made a sound. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even clear at first whether it came from him. But Caleb, watching from the outer post, knew immediately. The rumble was low and sustained, almost like breath vibrating through bone. It rose from deep inside the chest, reached outward, then tapered back into silence. The bull did not move. He simply stood, eyes forward, ears still. The calf froze, one foot half lifted. Her body shifted forward a few inches. Then she answered. Her own call was softer, more uneven, but unmistakably shaped in response. She took another step forward, this time faster. Her head lowered slightly. The gap between them closed in slow motion. Neither animal touched the other. They didn't need to. Their trunks moved in parallel, almost touching the ground, and the silence that followed felt older than anything the rangers could explain. What followed was not dramatic. The calf did not cry. The bull did not reach. But they stood within a few body lengths of each other for nearly an hour. and for the first time since the injury, the bull moved without hesitation, pivoting his weight, stepping once to the side to face her more directly and shifting just enough to indicate presence. Not dominance, not protection, just presence. Caleb wrote nothing down. There was no report for what happened, but he marked the time. 2 elephants who had survived separate wounds, one of the body, one of the mind, were no longer alone. What this connection meant for healing was unclear. Whether the calf was a sibling, a former herdmate, or simply drawn by scent and memory, no one could confirm. But she had found him, and he had answered. The sky above the compound softened as late morning settled in. Dust rose gently from underfoot as the 2 elephants shifted closer, their shapes silhouetted by the thin sun filtering through the thatch. The wind stirred the dry straw at the base of the fence, and for the first time in weeks, the sanctuary was quiet in a new way. Not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Something returned. The morning began without urgency. Pale light slid across the compound floor, touching the straw in slow strips, warming the scent of dust and dry bark. The calf was already awake, shifting her weight from side to side in quiet rhythm. She had slept close to the eastern wall, her flank pressed against the shadowed stone, and now her trunk brushed lightly across the soil, drawing small half-circles that faded as quickly as they formed. No one called her. No one moved toward her. The humans nearby simply waited. At the far side of the enclosure, the bull stirred. He'd been rising more easily, but his movements were still careful. First the front leg, testing pressure, then the back haunch, lifting with deliberate patience. This time, though, something was different. He did not pause to lean against the shelter wall. He did not shift in place or return to standing still. He turned. Across the short stretch of open space, the calf raised her head. She had not made a sound. Her posture changed subtly, neck extended, ears lifting just enough to listen. The bull stepped forward. One slow step, then another. No limp today. The bandaged leg was held beneath him without strain. The muscles trembled slightly with each shift, but his body remained balanced. He did not move toward food or water or shade. He moved toward her. The rangers stood still beyond the enclosure, watching. Caleb, closest to the gate, said only, "Let them." And no one followed. She didn't run to him. She waited until he reached halfway, then met him there. Their trunks touched briefly, not with urgency but with weight, resting lightly, then parting. The calf circled once, small and slow, and the bull matched her turn. When she walked toward the edge of the fence, he followed. For the first time since his rescue, he walked not because he needed to, but because something ahead of him moved with meaning. His gait was still uneven, the injured leg dragging slightly on turns, but the steps came steadily. Around the inner loop of the compound, the 2 shapes moved in quiet parallel. They did not touch again, but their spacing held, never closer than a breath, never further than a thought. This was not play. It was not displayed. It was motion, held together by something simple. A memory, maybe. A rhythm remembered. Whatever it was, it pulled the bull forward again and again, each step reinforcing what the last had begun. His shoulders rose more fully. His tail swayed once at the end of a turn, and when the calf stopped to brush her trunk across a dry patch of bark, he paused just behind her, close enough to feel the dust from her movement, but far enough to wait. The walk lasted nearly 20 minutes. When they returned to the resting space, the calf lay down first, curling into the straw with the slow certainty of a creature that had earned its place. The bull remained standing for several minutes longer. He turned once to face the outer gate, then lowered his head, and slowly, without prompting, he eased himself to the ground. The compound stayed quiet for a long while. No one approached. There was nothing to measure. No vital sign was more important than this. They were walking again. Together. Outside the fence, a wind began to rise across the low plains. It moved gently through the grass and rustled the thin leaves at the tree line. Dust lifted, then settled. In the stillness, two shapes rested side by side in the light. The dry season had set in early that year. Grasses along the southern boundary of the reserve grew brittle before their time, curling in the wind like thin paper. The sky remained wide and washed with sun, heat pressing down on the plains even in morning hours. Rangers marked patterns on the dust, prints of zebra, buffalo, and the quiet tracing of smaller calves returning to known grazing paths. And in the center of it all, beneath the ridge that had once concealed a snare, two elephants stood just beyond the final post of the sanctuary gate. They did not hesitate. They did not look back. The bull moved first, broader now, scarred but strong. The leg that had once failed him still bore weight unevenly, but the muscle above it had returned. The shoulder rolled with effort, but not struggle. His pace was slower than before, and every step carried caution, but it carried him forward. The smaller elephant followed in close rhythm, her frame no longer thin with confusion. She was not quite grown, but her steps had firmed with the months. She kept to his left, not touching, not trailing, just there, close enough for wind to pass between them without needing to close the gap. Caleb watched from the slope near the perimeter wall. He didn't wave, didn't speak. His hands rested lightly at his sides. What needed doing had already been done. There was no ceremony, no collars, no GPS tags, no banners. The two elephants had been cleared by the medical team 2 weeks earlier. Range conditions were favorable. The herds had begun to shift eastward again, and the riverbeds, while low, still carried enough moisture for feeding paths to remain safe. Everything had been measured: distance, timing, weather, risk. But in the end, it came down to one question. Could they move with purpose? Could they hold their own without being held? The answer had come quietly over days. Short walks extended into long ones. Morning feedings gave way to exploration. When one elephant paused, the other paused too. And when they moved in synchrony. Not led, not followed. Walks became circuits, and circuits turned into restlessness. The sanctuary had done what it was meant to. It was time. As the two figures moved across the salt trail, their outlines blurred slightly in the shimmering heat. Dust curled around their ankles, rising in soft whirls before falling again. The bull's ears fanned out once against the sun, then settled. The calf tilted her head briefly toward the east. Trunk lifted, then lowered again. A soft rumble passed between them. Not urgent, not alert, just presence. The trail beneath them was familiar. Caleb had passed it the day the snare was found, months ago. The wire had long since been removed, but the place still held the quiet of something once broken and now left open. Where one elephant had nearly died, two now crossed. And though no one could say what would happen beyond the next bend, whether a herd would take them in or they would travel alone, the fact of their movement was enough. They had survived, not because of the sanctuary alone, or the medicine, or the effort, but because something in them had chosen to continue, side by side. At the edge of the clearing, the sun shifted low, casting a long line of shadow across the trail. Wind moved through the grass with a gentle hush, and as the two elephants passed out of view, the sound of their steps faded behind them, leaving only the dry whisper of the earth, open, quiet, and waiting.